This video will examine the trim and extend commands in AutoCAD. Trim and extend are two commands that are very powerful in AutoCAD. They allow you to trim objects at intersections or extend objects to boundary edges. You must have two lines that intersect, or could possibly intersect, for this to work. In order to use the trim command, select Trim from the Modify panel. It asks you on the command line to select objects, but you have to be careful here because what it's really asking you for is to select your cutting edges. The cutting edges are those that would be the knife edge, not the thing that you want to get rid of. In this case, let's say I wanted to select that and that as a cutting edge. When I'm done selecting cutting edges, I press Enter to go to the trim mode. Then I can select the objects that I want to trim. I can trim objects on either side of the lines, so those on the bottom or those on the top. But now that I've selected these four, I cannot trim these up here because in order for something to be trimmed, it must extend to both sides of the trimming line. Let me undo that, and I'll do it again. Again, it begins by asking you to select your cutting edges. So I can say, that's a cutting edge, that's a cutting edge, that's a cutting edge, that's a cutting edge. Notice how they're highlighted so that you can tell which ones are cutting edges. When I'm done selecting cutting edges, I can press Enter, and then I can select the objects that I want to trim, either by picking them individually or using crossing windows or any other means. This line will be trimmed and not be trimmed at this line because this is not a cutting edge. I cannot trim this line, however, because it does not intersect these two, nor would ever intersect these two since they're parallel. I can intersect this one, or trim that one, but I cannot trim this one because it does not extend beyond the given lines. One more option in the trim command is to, when it asks for selecting cutting edges, is to select everything as a cutting edge. Notice it says on the command line, Trim, select object, or select all. If I press Enter right now, everything becomes a cutting edge, which saves me a little bit of time in the object selection as far as cutting edges goes. But now, let's say I wanted to trim out every one of these lines in between here, I would have to do 5 picks, rather than if I come in here and say Trim, here's a cutting edge, here's a cutting edge, get rid of those in the middle. It's much faster. So just be sure that you're using it appropriately. On the other hand, we have the extend command. The extend command is basically the twin sister of the trim command, and they stay together right here on the modify panel. When I get into the extend command, it doesn't ask for cutting edges, but it asks me for boundary edges. In order for something to be extended, it must reach a boundary edge. So I could say, if I wanted to extend this line all the way over here, I could pick that as a boundary edge, press Enter, and then extend that line out. I cannot extend this line any further because there are no additional boundary edges beyond that line. Again, if I go to Extend, I can pick a boundary edge, press Enter, and then select the line that I want to extend. As with the trim command, it also has a select all. So I can say extend. Notice on the command line it says select all. If I press Enter, now everything becomes a possible extension line, including those lines that go the other direction. But if I wanted it to be a one long line, it would be many more steps to actually have to extend that out than to just pick the one extension. So be aware of what it is that you're doing. Finally, you'll notice on the command line that it says select the object to extend or shift select to trim. So even though I'm in the extend command, if I hold the shift key down, I can use it as the trim command. And I can come in here and trim as many things as I want. Then when I'm done trimming, if I simply release the shift key, I can go back now to extending again.